March 15, 1987. Golden Harvest Studios, Hong Kong. Victor Chen had just screamed at Jackie Chan in front of 40 crew members, called him worthless, a coward, said he'd never work in films again. Jackie stood there, cameras rolling, blood trickling from his split lip where Victor's ring had caught him. Then Jackie smiled, looked directly into Victor's eyes, and spoke 5 words that would haunt Victor Chen for the next 30 to 7 years. You already know you're finished. By midnight, 3 major studios had called. By sunrise, Victor's biggest stars were breaking contracts. Within a week, the man who controlled Hong Kong cinema couldn't get a meeting with his own accountant. What Jackie knew that night, how he'd been watching, waiting, planning, the 5 words that ended an empire. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Hook, March 16, 1987, 3:47 a.m. Victor Chen's hands shook as he poured his 4th whiskey of the night. The amber liquid splashed onto his mahogany desk, staining the contracts that just 12 hours ago had been worth millions. The phone hadn't stopped ringing since Jackie walked off his set. Each ring was another nail in his coffin. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his mid-levels penthouse, Hong Kong's neon skyline bled electric blues and reds across his face. The city that had bowed to him for 15 years now felt like a prison. Victor loosened his silk tie, the same one he'd worn when he backhanded Jackie in front of the crew. The memory made his stomach lurch. Those 5 words echoed in his skull like a death knell. You already know you're finished. How could Jackie have known? Victor had been so careful. The offshore accounts, the buried photographs, the witnesses who'd been persuaded to forget what they'd seen that night at Shaw Brothers when Tommy Lou took his final fall. His private line buzzed. Victor's throat constricted. Only 3 people had that number: his lawyer, his accountant, and his fixer in Macau. Chen. His voice came out as a croak. Victor. The voice belonged to Raymond Kwok, his lawyer of 20 years. We need to talk. Now. It's nearly 4 in the morning, Raymond. Golden Princess just pulled out of Dragonfire. Shaw Brothers terminated your 3-picture deal an hour ago. Cinema City won't return my calls. Raymond's breathing was labored, panicked. What the hell happened on that set? Victor closed his eyes. He could still see Jackie's face. Not the pain from the split lip, but the cold satisfaction in his eyes. The look of a man who'd been waiting years for this moment. Jackie Chan happened. This is about more than some on-set tantrum, Victor. I'm hearing whispers about other things, old things. People are asking questions about Tommy Lou again. The whiskey glass slipped from Victor's fingers, shattering against the marble floor. Tommy Lou, the stuntman who died during the filming of Blood Moon in 1984. The man whose death Victor had carefully orchestrated to look like an accident. Tommy had been asking too many questions about the money skimming, threatening to go to the press. 1 loosened safety cable, 1 8-story fall, problem solved. Except now, somehow, Jackie knew. Victor, you still there? I'm here. Victor stared at his reflection in the darkened window. 52 years old, silver threading through his black hair, the face that had intimidated Hong Kong's biggest stars for over a decade. Tonight, he looked like a broken old man. There's something else. My contact at the police says they received an anonymous package tonight. Photographs, documents. They're opening an investigation into Tommy's death. The room spun. Victor gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white. What kind of photographs? The kind that show Tommy's safety harness was tampered with. The kind that show you talking to the rigger 20 minutes before the stunt. The kind that are going to put you in Stanley Prison for the rest of your life. Victor's mind raced. Who else had been there that night? The rigger, Wong Siu Ming, had died in a car accident 6 months after Tommy's funeral. Very convenient, very final. The assistant director had taken a lucrative job in Hollywood shortly after and never returned. Victor had made sure of that. But someone had been watching. Someone had been collecting evidence for 3 years. Someone like Jackie Chan. Raymond, I need you to... The line went dead. Victor stared at the phone, a chill creeping down his spine. Through his wall of windows, Hong Kong glittered like a jeweled snake, beautiful and venomous. Somewhere out there, Jackie was probably sleeping peacefully, knowing that justice was finally coming for Victor Chen. He thought about running. The Cayman's account had enough to keep him comfortable for life. Private jet to Singapore, then disappear into Southeast Asia where his money still carried weight. But Victor Chen didn't run. He destroyed. His hands steadied as he reached for his personal phone book, the black leather one with the numbers that didn't officially exist. Numbers for men who solved problems quietly, permanently. Jackie Chan thought 5 words could finish Victor Chen. The naive young actor was about to learn that Hong Kong's most feared director hadn't built his empire by backing down from threats. He'd built it by eliminating them. Victor dialed the first number. It rang twice before a gravelly voice answered in Cantonese. "Wei? It's Victor Chen. I have a job for you." The hunt was just beginning. What really happened on that film set 30 years ago? What was Jackie's master plan that brought down Hong Kong's most powerful director? Tomorrow, we're diving deep into the secret footage that could destroy Victor's life forever. Hit that subscribe button now. You won't want to miss what happens next. Introduction. "Make it look like an accident," Victor whispered into the phone, his voice steady for the first time in hours. "Jackie Chan has been struggling with depression. The pressure of Hollywood, you understand. These foreign actors, they're fragile. It will take time to arrange properly," the voice replied. 2 weeks, maybe 3. You have 48 hours. Victor hung up and sank into his leather chair, the familiar weight of orchestrated violence settling over him like an old coat. This was who he was, who he'd always been. The trembling hands, the broken whiskey glass, that was weakness talking. Fear. Victor Chen didn't survive 15 years atop Hong Kong's cutthroat film industry by being weak. The first gray light of dawn crept through his windows, painting the city in muted watercolors. Soon, his housekeeper, Mrs. Wong, would arrive with fresh jasmine tea and the morning papers. She'd been with him for 12 years, ever since his wife Li Ming died of cancer. Mrs. Wong never asked questions about the late-night phone calls or the men with dead eyes who sometimes visited his study. She simply polished the mahogany and watered the orchids Li Ming had loved so much. Victor's chest tightened at the thought of his wife. Li Ming had believed in him once, back when he was just another ambitious assistant director sleeping on a friend's couch in Wan Chai. She'd married him in 1968 when he had nothing but dreams and a battered script about honor among thieves. "You have kind eyes, Victor," she told him on their wedding night. "Promise me you'll never lose that kindness." He touched the jade ring on his finger, her final gift to him, passed down from her grandmother. Li Ming had slipped it onto his pinky 3 days before the cancer took her, her once beautiful hands skeletal and cold. "Remember who you were when you loved me," she'd whispered. Kindness was a luxury Victor couldn't afford. Not in a business where showing mercy meant showing weakness. Every director in Hong Kong was waiting for him to stumble, to show his throat to the wolves. The studios, the triads who bankrolled half the industry, the actors who smiled to his face while plotting behind his back. They were all circling, patient as sharks. The irony wasn't lost on him that Jackie Chan, of all people, might be the one to finally draw blood. Victor remembered the first time he'd met Jackie. 1983, a hot August morning at Golden Princess Studios. Jackie had just returned from his failed attempts at Hollywood stardom, tail between his legs, desperate for work. Victor was casting for Blood Moon, looking for someone fearless enough to handle the brutal stunt work himself. Jackie had been hungry then, grateful even. He'd performed every death-defying leap Victor demanded without complaint, pushing his body to its limits for a chance at redemption. "I owe you everything, Director Chen," Jackie had said after wrapping his first scene, blood trickling from a cut above his eye. "You gave me a second chance when no one else would." Such sincerity in those words. Such naive trust. Victor poured himself another whiskey, his 5th or 6th, he'd lost count. The liquid burned less now, settling into his stomach like liquid regret. Outside, Hong Kong was waking up. Traffic horns echoed off the glass towers. Street vendors were setting up their stalls, filling the air with the scent of fishballs and star anise. Life continuing its relentless march, indifferent to the destruction about to unfold. He walked to the window and pressed his palm against the cool glass. Somewhere in this city was his daughter Mei Lin, probably getting ready for her shift at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. 28 years old, beautiful like her mother with that same stubborn streak that had made Li Ming stand up to him when his temper flared. Mei Lin barely spoke to him anymore. She'd been horrified by the rumors that swirled around his business dealings, the whispered stories of actors who'd crossed Victor Chen and mysteriously lost their careers. "You've become someone I don't recognize, Baba," she'd told him last Christmas, the only time she'd visited all year. "Ma wouldn't recognize you either." She was wrong. Li Ming would recognize him perfectly. She'd see exactly what he'd become in order to protect everything they'd built together: the house in mid-levels, the production company that bore her maiden name, the trust fund that would ensure Mei Lin never wanted for anything. Li Ming would understand that monsters weren't born. They were forged in the crucible of necessity. The phone rang again. Victor glanced at the caller ID and felt his stomach clench. "Mei Lin? Baba?" His daughter's voice was thick with tears. "I just saw the news about Jackie Chan leaving your film. They're saying terrible things on the radio about you, about things that happened years ago." Victor closed his eyes. It was starting already. The feeding frenzy. By noon, every scandal sheet in Hong Kong would be running headlines about Victor Chen's fall from grace. "Don't believe everything you hear, little flower. Is it true? About that stuntman who died?" The question hung in the air like incense smoke. Heavy, suffocating. "I love you, Mei Lin. Whatever happens, remember that." She was crying now. "Baba, you're scaring me." Through his window, Victor watched the sun climb higher, burning away the last traces of night. Soon, very soon, Jackie Chan would learn that some men were too dangerous to threaten, even if it meant destroying everything Victor had left to lose. Victor hung up the phone, his daughter's tears still echoing in his ears like a funeral dirge. The silence that followed felt different, heavier, more permanent. In 37 years of marriage and fatherhood, he'd never heard Mei Lin sound so broken, so afraid of the man who was supposed to protect her. He was still staring at the phone when Mrs. Wong's key turned in the front door. Her familiar shuffle echoed through the marble foyer, followed by the gentle clink of the tea service. Any moment now, she'd knock on his study door with jasmine tea and the morning papers. Papers that would undoubtedly feature his destruction splashed across their headlines. But today, something was different. Mrs. Wong's footsteps paused outside his door for longer than usual. When she finally knocked, her voice carried an unfamiliar tremor. "Sir? There's a delivery for you. A man brought it personally. He said it was urgent." Victor frowned. Deliveries at dawn weren't unusual in his line of work. Scripts, contracts, sometimes more sensitive materials that couldn't wait for normal business hours. But Mrs. Wong had been with him through countless such deliveries, and she'd never sounded rattled before. "Bring it in." The door opened slowly. Mrs. Wong entered carrying her usual silver tray, but instead of newspapers, a small manila envelope sat beside the teapot. Her hands shook slightly as she set the tray down, and Victor noticed she wouldn't meet his eyes. "The man who brought it," Victor said carefully. "Did you recognize him?" "No, sir, he was young. Chinese-American, maybe. Spoke perfect Cantonese, but with an accent. He knew my name." She finally looked up, and Victor saw something he'd never seen in her weathered face before: fear. "He knew about my grandson's scholarship fund. The one you set up anonymously." Victor's blood turned to ice. The scholarship fund was buried under 3 shell companies and 2 offshore accounts. Only his lawyer and his accountant knew about it, and both had been paid handsomely for their discretion. What else did he say? "He said to tell you that Tommy Lou's widow sends her regards." The words hit Victor like a physical blow. Tommy Lou's widow, Lily, had died in a car accident in 1985, less than a year after her husband's death. Victor had personally ensured she received a generous settlement from the production company's insurance policy. Grief money, paid in cash, no questions asked. The same week she'd deposited the money, her car had slid off a rain-slicked road in the New Territories. Another accident, another loose end tied up. But someone was invoking her name now, someone who knew details that had been buried for years. Mrs. Wong retreated quickly, closing the door behind her with unusual haste. Victor stared at the envelope, afraid to touch it. The manila paper was old, yellowed at the edges, as if it had been stored somewhere for decades. His name was written across the front in faded blue ink, in a handwriting he almost recognized but couldn't quite place. With trembling fingers, He opened the envelope. Inside was a single black and white photograph and a folded piece of paper. The photograph showed a young man Victor recognized immediately, Tommy Lou, maybe 25 years old, standing next to a beautiful woman holding a toddler. They were laughing at something off camera, Tommy's arm wrapped protectively around his family. On the back, someone had written in the same faded blue ink, Thomas, Lily, and David Lou. 1983, David. Victor's hands began to shake violently. Tommy Lou had had a son, David, who would have been barely 3 when his father died. The boy had disappeared after his mother's death, supposedly taken in by relatives in America. Victor's people had looked for him briefly, more out of thoroughness than concern. A 3-year-old posed no threat to anyone, but a 3-year-old could grow up, could start asking questions, could spend decades collecting evidence and waiting for the perfect moment for revenge. Victor unfolded the paper with hands that felt disconnected from his body. The message was brief, typed on an old typewriter, the letters slightly uneven. Director Chen, my father died because he discovered you were stealing from the production budgets. My mother died because she wouldn't stop asking questions. I've spent 28 years learning the truth about what you did to my family. I have photographs of the tampered safety equipment. I have recordings of your conversations with Wang Su Ming before he rigged my father's harness. I have bank records showing the payments you made to have my mother killed. I have everything. Jackie Chan was just the beginning. By the time you read this, copies of everything have been delivered to every major newspaper in Hong Kong, to the police, and to the families of every person you've destroyed over the years. Your empire ends today. David Lou. Victor's vision blurred. The paper slipped from his fingers and fluttered to the floor like a dying bird. 30 years. The boy had spent 30 years methodically building a case against him, collecting evidence, positioning himself for this moment. And Jackie had been working with him. Those 5 words weren't a threat. They were a promise that had already been kept. The phone began ringing again, but Victor couldn't move. Through his windows, Hong Kong sparkled in the morning sun, beautiful and indifferent to the fact that his world had just ended. He was finished. The phone continued its relentless ringing, each shrill note driving deeper into Victor's skull like nails into a coffin. He stared at the photograph of Tommy Lou's family, the happy faces now feeling like accusers staring up at him from his mahogany desk. Somewhere in America, that laughing toddler had grown into a man with infinite patience and a hunger for justice that had festered for 3 decades. Victor's first instinct was to run, grab his passport, empty the Cayman accounts, disappear into the sprawling anonymity of Southeast Asia. But his legs felt like water, and the weight of David Lou's words pressed down on him like a physical force. By the time you read this, copies of everything have been delivered. It was already too late. The phone fell silent, then immediately began ringing again. This time, Victor forced himself to answer. Wei? Victor. Thank God. It was Simon Lau, his longtime cinematographer and one of the few people in the industry Victor still trusted. I've been trying to reach you for an hour. We need to meet. Now, somewhere private. What's happening? Simon's voice dropped to a whisper. Not over the phone. They could be listening. Meet me at the old tea house in Central, the one where we used to plan our shoots. 1 hour. The line went dead before Victor could respond. He sat in the growing morning light, trying to process the fear he'd heard in Simon's voice. Simon had worked with him for 15 years, had been there for some of Victor's darkest moments. If Simon was afraid to speak on the phone, Victor stood on unsteady legs and walked to his safe, hidden behind a false panel that had been Li Ming's idea. Inside were the usual documents, deeds, contracts, insurance policies, but also a manila folder that contained his real insurance, photographs of prominent Hong Kong businessmen in compromising positions, recordings of triad leaders discussing their movie investments, bank records that could destroy half the legislative council. Information was power, and power was survival. But as he touched the folder, Victor realized how naive he'd been. David Lou had spent 28 years preparing for this moment. What good were Victor's secrets against someone who'd had decades to plan? The drive to Central usually took 20 minutes, but today Victor's Mercedes crawled through traffic that seemed deliberately obstructive. Every red light felt personal. Twice he thought he spotted the same black sedan in his rearview mirror, but when he looked again, it was gone. Paranoia, maybe. Or maybe David Liu had learned more than just patience during his years in America. The tea house sat tucked between two gleaming office towers, a relic from Hong Kong's colonial past that somehow survived the city's relentless modernization. Simon was already there when Victor arrived, hunched over a corner table with his back to the wall. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, shirt wrinkled, tie loosened, the careful grooming of a successful filmmaker replaced by the haggard look of a hunted man. "They came to my apartment last night," Simon said without preamble as Victor sat down. 3 men in suits. They didn't identify themselves, but they knew things, Victor. Things about the Liu incident that were never in any police report. Victor's mouth went dry. What kind of things? They knew about the payment we made to Wang Suming's family after his car accident. They knew about the insurance investigator who got transferred to Macau right after he started asking questions. They knew about the film equipment that got destroyed in that convenient warehouse fire. Simon's hands trembled as he lifted his teacup. But most importantly, they knew I was there that night. They knew I saw you talking to Wang before the stunt. The tea house suddenly felt suffocating. Around them, elderly men played xiangqi and read newspapers, their quiet conversations creating a backdrop of normalcy that felt surreal. How many of those newspapers carried his name today? How many contained the photographs David Liu had promised to distribute? What did you tell them? Simon's laugh was bitter. What could I tell them? That I've kept your secrets for 15 years because you made me rich? That I never spoke up because I was afraid you'd do to me what you did to Tommy? He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. They didn't want a confession, Victor. They already have everything they need. They just wanted me to know that staying silent won't protect me anymore. Victor felt the walls closing in. If they'd approached Simon, they'd likely contacted others. Crew members, studio executives, anyone who'd been part of the conspiracy of silence that had protected him for decades. David Liu wasn't just attacking Victor, he was systematically dismantling the entire network of fear and complicity that had been Victor's real power base. There's something else, Simon continued. They mentioned Jackie Chan. Said he's been working with them for months setting up that confrontation yesterday. It was all planned, Victor. Every word, every camera angle. They wanted you angry, wanted you to reveal yourself. Victor's vision blurred as the magnitude of his situation became clear. This wasn't just about evidence or justice, it was about complete, methodical destruction. David Liu had inherited his father's patience and his mother's determination, and he'd spent 3 decades learning how to destroy a man as powerful as Victor Chen. The hunter had become the hunted, and Victor was already trapped in a web 30 years in the making. Victor's teacup shattered against the table as his hand convulsed, jasmine tea spreading across the wood like spilled blood. The elderly xiangqi players glanced over with mild irritation, but Victor barely noticed. His mind was reeling, calculating how many people David Liu might have contacted, how many secrets were about to spill into the light. "I need to make calls," Victor whispered, pulling out his phone with trembling fingers. "Damage control. There has to be—" "Victor." Simon's voice was flat, defeated. "I already tried. My contacts at the newspapers won't take my calls. The police commissioner's office said he's unavailable indefinitely. Even my triad connections have gone silent." He gestured helplessly at his own phone lying dead on the table. "It's like we've been erased from the industry overnight." The words hit Victor like a physical blow. In Hong Kong's film industry, relationships were everything, the intricate web of favors, debts, and mutual secrets that kept the machine running. If that network was being systematically severed— "Mrs. Wang called while I was driving here," Victor said suddenly, remembering the 3 missed calls from his housekeeper. "She never calls." He dialed her number with hands that refused to stay steady. She answered on the first ring, her voice high with panic. "Sir, you must come home. Now. There are people here. Reporters, police cars. And sir," her voice broke, "your daughter is here. Miss Mai Lin came with men in suits. She's been crying." The phone slipped from Victor's grasp, clattering onto the tea-stained table. Mei Lin. They'd brought his daughter into this, the one person in his life who still carried traces of innocence, who worked as a nurse healing people instead of destroying them. David Liu hadn't just targeted Victor's empire, he'd gone after his family. Simon was saying something, but Victor couldn't focus on the words. Images flooded his mind. Mei Lin at 8 years old, riding on his shoulders through Temple Street night market. Mei Lin at 16, furiously arguing with him about his business methods after overhearing a phone call. Mei Lin last Christmas, looking at him with such disappointment that he'd had to turn away. "You've become someone I don't recognize, Baba." Now she would learn exactly who her father really was. Not through whispered rumors or industry gossip, but through police testimony and newspaper headlines that would detail every murder, every cover-up, every life he'd destroyed in service of his empire. "I have to go to her," Victor muttered, standing abruptly. The movement sent his chair scraping against the floor, drawing more stares from the other patrons. "Victor, wait!" Simon grabbed his arm. "If you go home now, they'll arrest you. Whatever evidence they have, they're probably waiting for you to—" "She's my daughter!" The words exploded out of him, loud enough that the entire tea house fell silent. Victor looked around at the startled faces, realizing he was unraveling in public, becoming the spectacle that David Liu had orchestrated. But what choice did he have? Let Mei Lin face this alone? Let her learn about Tommy Liu's death, about Lily Liu's accident, about the dozen other bodies buried in his wake, surrounded by strangers and investigators? Victor pulled out his wallet and threw money on the table. Too much, his hands shaking too badly to count properly. As he headed for the door, Simon called after him. "Victor, there's something else. Something I didn't tell you." His voice carried across the silent tea house like a confession. "I knew Tommy was going to confront you that night. He'd figured out about the budget skimming, about the safety equipment purchases that never happened. But he wasn't going to expose you." Victor stopped, one hand on the door handle. "What?" "He was going to ask for a partnership. Tommy thought if he kept quiet about your embezzlement, you'd cut him in. Make him a producing partner." Simon's laugh held no humor. "He wasn't trying to destroy you, Victor. He was trying to join you, and you killed him for it." The words followed Victor out into the Hong Kong morning like ghosts. Tommy Liu hadn't been a threat. He'd been a potential ally who'd died because Victor had assumed the worst. How many others had he destroyed out of paranoia rather than necessity? How many bodies had he stepped over that he could have stepped around? As Victor's Mercedes crawled through the Central District traffic toward his home, he caught glimpses of newspaper stands displaying his photograph. Even through the car windows, he could make out the bold Chinese characters: murder, corruption, 30 years of lies. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "She has your eyes. It would be a shame if she inherited anything else. DL." Victor's hands tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. David Liu wasn't just destroying his past, he was threatening his future. The only pure thing Victor had left in his life was about to learn that her father was a monster, and somewhere in the city ahead, his daughter was waiting for him to come home and explain the unexplainable. The gates to Victor's mansion stood open like a wound. Police cars and news vans clustered in his circular driveway like vultures around carrion. Victor parked across the street, hands frozen on the steering wheel as he watched strangers trampling through the sanctuary he'd built with blood money and broken dreams. Through his living room windows, he could see figures moving, investigators methodically dismantling his life, searching for evidence they already possessed. And somewhere in that house was Mei Lin, his 26-year-old daughter who still believed her father had made his fortune through talent rather than murder. Victor's phone rang. The caller ID showed only D. Liu. He answered with trembling fingers. "Enjoying the view?" David Liu's voice was calm, almost conversational. American accented English layered over perfect Cantonese, the voice of someone who'd learned to navigate between worlds. "Where are you?" "Close enough to see you sitting in your car like a coward. Your daughter's been asking for you. She keeps telling the investigators there's been some mistake, that Victor Chen could never hurt anyone." A soft chuckle. "It's heartbreaking, really. Such faith." Victor scanned the street, the neighboring houses, looking for any sign of movement. "What do you want?" "I want you to walk into that house, and face what you've done. I want you to look your daughter in the eyes and explain why Tommy Lou had to die, why my mother's car needed to slide off that road." The calm facade cracked slightly. "I want you to feel what I felt when I was 3 years old and everyone I loved disappeared. Your parents' deaths were—" "Careful." David's voice turned arctic. "I have 30 years of evidence that says otherwise. But more importantly, I have something you don't know about yet. Something that changes everything." Victor's breath caught. "What?" "My mother didn't die in that car accident, Victor. She survived." The words hit Victor like a physical blow. He'd paid Wong Su-ming's nephew 50,000 Hong Kong dollars to tamper with Lily Lu's brakes. He'd received confirmation that the job was done, that the widow had been silenced permanently. The funeral had been small, quiet. He'd even sent flowers. That's impossible. She was thrown clear when the car rolled. Broken spine, traumatic brain injury, but alive. The hospital listed her as Jane Doe for 3 months while she recovered. By the time she could speak again, everyone believed she was dead, including you. David's voice carried the weight of decades of planning. She spent 25 years in a care facility in California, paralyzed but conscious. And she remembered everything, Victor. Every conversation, every threat, every detail about what you did to my father. Victor's vision blurred. Lily Lu, alive, watching, waiting, planning. "She died 2 years ago," David continued, "but not before she told me everything, not before she made me promise to finish what she started. The evidence I've been collecting, it wasn't just my investigation, it was hers. 25 years of methodical patient detective work by a woman you tried to kill." The revelation recontextualized everything Victor thought he knew about his situation. This wasn't just the revenge of an orphaned child. This was the culmination of a quarter-century investigation by someone who'd witnessed his empire's construction from the inside. Lily Lu had known his methods, his contacts, his weaknesses. She'd had decades to study him while he believed himself safe. "She never forgot the sound of your voice when you called the house the night before my father died," David said. "Never forgot the way you laughed when you told her that accidents happen to people who ask too many questions. She recorded our conversations, Victor. Every strategy session, every piece of evidence we gathered. There are hours of audio of her describing what you put our family through." Victor thought of all the nights he'd slept peacefully, believing his secrets were buried with Tommy Lou and his wife. Meanwhile, Lily had been lying in a hospital bed in Los Angeles, her paralyzed fingers slowly learning to type, building a case that would destroy him. "The beautiful irony," David continued, "is that you made her the perfect witness, invisible, presumed dead, with nothing but time and motivation. You created your own nemesis." Through his windshield, Victor saw the front door of his house open. Mei Lin emerged, flanked by 2 investigators, her face streaked with tears. Even from across the street, he could see the moment she spotted his car, the desperate relief that crossed her features as she raised her hand to wave. She still believed in him, still thought there was an explanation that would make sense of the chaos surrounding their family name. She had no idea that her father was already dead, killed not by David Lu's evidence, but by the ghost of a woman whose murder had failed 30 years too late. Victor Chen, Hong Kong's most feared director, had been destroyed by the one person he'd thought he'd successfully silenced. And now he had to walk into that house and watch his daughter's faith die along with everything else. Victor's hands wouldn't release the steering wheel. Across the street, Mei Lin was walking toward his car, her nurse's uniform wrinkled from hours of questioning, her face a mixture of hope and growing horror. Behind her, the investigators weren't trying to stop her. They wanted this confrontation. They wanted to watch him break his daughter's heart in real time. "Go to her," David Lu's voice whispered through the phone that still pressed against Victor's ear. "Tell her the truth about who her father really is." Victor ended the call and stepped out of the Mercedes. His legs nearly buckled as Mei Lin reached him, her arms wrapping around his chest like she was still the little girl who'd run to him after nightmares. But now he was the nightmare. "Baba, what's happening?" Her voice was muffled against his shoulder. "They're saying terrible things. They have photographs, recordings. They're calling you a murderer." She pulled back to look at him, searching his face for the denial she needed. "Tell them they're wrong." Victor opened his mouth, but no words came. How could he explain that every terrible thing they'd told her was true? That the money that paid for her medical school had been earned through systematic intimidation and murder? That her father wasn't the complicated but ultimately good man she'd believed in, but a monster who'd killed anyone who threatened his empire? Abba? Her voice was smaller now, uncertainty creeping in as his silence stretched too long. You have to tell them they're wrong. Mei Lin. He touched her cheek, memorizing the moment before everything changed. I need you to understand something. The film industry in the 80s, it was different. Dangerous. Sometimes people had to make impossible choices. Her eyes widened. What are you saying? I'm saying that sometimes good people do terrible things to protect what matters to them. The words felt like swallowing glass. I did everything I did to build something lasting. For you. For our family name. What did you do? The question was barely a whisper. Before Victor could answer, his phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number again. Check the morning edition. Front page. With trembling fingers, Victor pulled up the South China Morning Post on his phone. The headline hit him like a physical blow. Hong Kong film legend's daughter dies in suspicious accident. Below it was a photograph of Mei Lin leaving her hospital shift yesterday, laughing with a colleague. They're threatening you, Victor breathed, showing her the screen. David Liu is threatening you. Mei Lin stared at the headline, her face going pale. Who is David Liu? The son of a man Victor's voice broke. The son of a man who died 30 years ago. A stuntman named Tommy Liu. Died how? The question hung in the air between them like a blade. Around them, neighbors had begun emerging from their houses, drawn by the police cars and news vans. Victor could feel their stares, their whispered conversations that would follow Mei Lin for the rest of her life. There was an accident on set, Victor said finally. A stunt went wrong. Tommy fell. An accident. Mei Lin's voice was flat, testing the word. But they're saying it wasn't an accident. They're saying you... I gave orders that put him in danger, yes. I cut corners on safety equipment. I pushed for a stunt that shouldn't have been attempted. Each admission felt like tearing away pieces of his soul, but I never intended for him to die. Never intended. She stepped back from him, her nurse's training kicking in, the clinical distance she used with difficult patients. What about the others? Others? The investigators mentioned other names, other accidents. Her voice was growing stronger, more demanding. How many others, Baba? Victor looked into his daughter's eyes and saw the moment her childhood officially ended. The moment she stopped being the innocent girl who believed her father was complicated but good, and became the woman who would have to live with the truth of what he'd done. Enough, he whispered. Too many. Mei Lin's face crumpled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she pulled out her own phone and began typing rapidly. Victor watched, confused, until she turned the screen toward him. She was posting on social media, a long message that began, "The reports about my father are true. I cannot stand by his actions, and I will not hide behind his name." What are you doing? What you should have done 30 years ago. She pressed send and watched the post go live. I'm choosing the truth. Victor's phone rang again. David Liu. Beautiful, David's voice said when Victor answered. She's stronger than you ever were. But it won't save her unless you do exactly what I tell you next. Victor looked at his daughter, who was staring at the chaos surrounding their home with the calm focus of someone making impossible decisions under pressure. She'd inherited his steel spine, but unlike him, she'd chosen to use it for honesty rather than self-preservation. What do you want? Meet me where it all began. Studio 7, Clearwater Bay. 1 hour. Come alone, and maybe your daughter lives to rebuild what you've destroyed. The line went dead, leaving Victor staring at the phone that had just delivered his final ultimatum. Climax. Studio 7 stood like a mausoleum in the pre-dawn darkness, its windows black and empty, the sound stages that had once housed Victor's empire now echoing with 30 years of silence. Victor's Mercedes crunched over broken glass and scattered debris as he pulled into the abandoned lot where Tommy Liu had died, where everything had begun to unravel before Victor even realized he was falling. The massive warehouse doors hung open like a mouth frozen mid-scream. Victor stepped out of his car, the October wind cutting through his jacket with surgical precision. Every shadow seemed to hold ghosts, extras from forgotten films, stuntmen whose names he'd erased from history, the countless people who'd been ground up in his machine of ambition and fear. 30 years, a voice said from the darkness inside the warehouse. 30 years since you stood here and watched my father die. David Liu emerged from the shadows, and Victor saw him clearly for the first time. Mid-30s, lean build, wearing a simple black jacket that couldn't hide the coiled tension in his shoulders. But it was his eyes that stopped Victor's breath. Tommy's eyes, dark and intelligent, filled with the same quiet intensity that had made Tommy Liu the best stuntman in Hong Kong. The eyes of a man who calculated risks and accepted consequences. You look like him, Victor whispered. I have his sense of justice, too. David stepped into the pale light filtering through the broken skylights. My mother made sure of that. 25 years in that hospital bed, and she never let me forget what justice looked like. Victor's phone buzzed, a photo message showing Mei Lin walking into her apartment building, unaware of the camera capturing her movement. The implicit threat needed no words. She's safe for now, David said, noticing Victor's reaction. But that depends entirely on what happens in the next few minutes. Do you want from me? A confession? Public humiliation? Victor's voice cracked. You've already destroyed everything I built. My company's finished, my reputation is ash, my daughter knows what I am. What else is there? David reached into his jacket and pulled out an old film canister, its metal surface dented and scarred with age. Do you remember this? Victor stared at the canister, his blood turning to ice. He'd thought all the footage from that night had been destroyed, every camera destroyed, every witness silenced. But here it was, the one thing he'd feared most for 3 decades. The night camera, Victor breathed. I ordered them to destroy all the film. My father knew you were planning something. He hid this camera in the rafters before the stunt. David's voice was steady, clinical. Everything is here, Victor. You cutting the safety cables, you bribing the equipment inspector, you giving the signal for my father to jump knowing the rigging would fail. The footage Victor had convinced himself was destroyed. The evidence that would prove Tommy Liu's death was cold-blooded murder rather than criminal negligence. The difference between a ruined reputation and life in prison. But that's not the worst part, David continued, setting the canister on a nearby crate with the reverence of someone handling sacred relics. The worst part is what you said afterward, when my father was lying there bleeding and you thought the cameras were off. Victor's knees nearly buckled as the memory crashed back. Tommy, broken and dying, reaching out with a trembling hand, and Victor, leaning close as if to offer comfort, whispering the words that had haunted his nightmares for 30 years. You remember now. David's voice was soft, almost gentle. You told a dying man that his wife and son would be next if he didn't keep quiet. You threatened a 3-year-old child while my father bled to death. I was protecting myself, protecting everything I'd built. You were protecting nothing. David's composure finally cracked, revealing the raw grief beneath. You were feeding your own fear, and that fear turned you into something that had to keep killing to survive. Victor looked around the abandoned studio, seeing it as it had been that night. Lights blazing, crew members scurrying between cameras, the smell of smoke machines and desperation thick in the air. He'd been 44 then, already successful but hungry for legendary status. Tommy Liu had been the best stuntman in Asia, willing to attempt anything for the right price. But Tommy had also been smart enough to notice when safety budgets were being skimmed, when equipment purchases were being falsified. He wasn't going to expose you, David said, reading Victor's thoughts. My mother told me everything. My father was going to offer you a partnership. Join your system instead of fighting it. He died trying to become what you were. The revelation hit Victor like a physical blow. Tommy Liu, the man whose death had launched Victor's reign of terror, had been reaching out in friendship, not enmity. Every murder that followed, every life destroyed, every act of brutality Victor had justified as necessary self-defense had been built on a foundation of paranoid delusion. I didn't know, Victor whispered. You didn't want to know, because knowing would have meant admitting you were killing people out of cowardice, not strength. David lifted the film canister again. This footage doesn't just show murder, Victor. It shows a pathetic old man so terrified of losing his toys that he'd rather destroy the world than share it. Victor's phone rang. Mei Lin's ringtone. "Answer it," David commanded. "But remember, her life depends on what you say next." With trembling fingers, Victor accepted the call. His daughter's voice was calm, resolved, carrying the weight of someone who'd made an irreversible decision. "Baba, I know you're at the studio," the investigators told me. A pause. "I want you to know that whatever happens tonight, I forgive you, but I can't save you anymore." The line went dead. Victor looked up at David Liu, at Tommy's eyes in a stranger's face, and finally understood that his empire hadn't been destroyed by external forces. It had been destroyed by the fundamental flaw at its core, his own cowardice masquerading as strength. "Show me the footage," Victor said quietly. "It's time I saw what I really am." David smiled, his father's smile, sad and knowing, and began threading the film into an old projector that had been waiting 30 years for this moment. The projector's mechanical heartbeat echoed through the empty studio as grainy images flickered to life on the makeshift screen, a paint-stained wall that had once displayed Victor's cinematic dreams. There he was, 30 years younger, pacing behind cameras with the predatory confidence of a man who believed the world owed him everything. And there was Tommy Liu, checking his harness one final time, unaware that the cables had already been sabotaged. Victor watched himself on screen, saw the calculated coldness in his younger face as Tommy approached the jump platform. No hesitation, no second thoughts, just the mechanical precision of a man who had already decided another human being was expendable. "Stop," Victor whispered, but David let the film continue. The fall happened in slow motion, Tommy's body spinning through the air as the rigging snapped exactly as planned, his face transforming from professional concentration to confused terror in the seconds before impact. The sound of bone meeting concrete carried through 3 decades with crystalline clarity. But it was what came next that destroyed what remained of Victor's soul. There he was on screen, kneeling beside Tommy's broken body, leaning close as if offering comfort. The audio was faint but audible. This is what happens to people who ask questions. Your wife, your son, they can disappear just as easily. Tommy's dying whisper, barely caught by the hidden microphone. "Please, they're innocent." And Victor's response, delivered with bureaucratic efficiency. "Then make sure they stay that way." The projector clicked to a stop, leaving them in darkness broken only by the pale dawn light creeping through the skylights. Victor stood motionless, finally seeing himself as he truly was. Not a feared emperor or successful businessman, but a coward who had built his legacy on the grave of a man who had only wanted to feed his family. 30 years, David said, rewinding the film with practiced movements. 30 years of telling yourself he was a threat. How does it feel to know you killed him for reaching out his hand in friendship? Victor's voice came out as broken as Tommy's had been in those final moments. "What happens now? Now you choose." David pulled a second film canister from his jacket. "This one contains copies of every piece of evidence we've gathered. Financial records, witness testimonies, documentation of 7 murders spanning 3 decades. Tomorrow morning, it gets delivered to every major news outlet in Asia. Unless you deliver it yourself." David set both canisters on the crate between them. "Walk into the central police station at sunrise. Tell them everything. Name every victim, every bribe, every crime. Take responsibility for what you built." Victor stared at the canisters, 2 different versions of his legacy. One where he remained a monster hiding in the shadows, and one where he became something he had never been, accountable. "And if I do this, Mei Lin lives her life free from your shadow. The media narrative becomes about a daughter who exposed her father's crimes, not a victim who paid for his sins." David's voice softened slightly. "She's stronger than you ever gave her credit for. She'll survive this. She'll thrive." Through the broken windows, Victor could see Hong Kong's skyline beginning to glow with morning light. The city he had once ruled through fear now awakening to a world where his power no longer existed. Somewhere out there, Mei Lin was probably lying awake, processing the destruction of everything she thought she knew about her family. But she had chosen truth over comfort, courage over complicity. His daughter had become the person he never had the strength to be. Victor picked up the evidence canister, feeling its weight, not just the physical heft of decades of documentation, but the gravitational pull of consequences finally demanding acknowledgement. For the first time in 30 years, he wasn't afraid of losing his empire. His empire was already gone, destroyed not by external enemies but by the fundamental truth that it had never been real in the first place. "Tommy," Victor said to the empty air where his victim's son stood watching. "I'm sorry." David Liu nodded once, acceptance, not forgiveness, and walked toward the warehouse doors. At the threshold, he stopped without turning around. My father believed people could change, even at the end. I hope he was right. Then Victor was alone in Studio 7, holding the evidence of his crimes as dawn broke over Hong Kong. He thought of Mei Lin, of Tommy Liu, of all the people who had paid the price for his cowardice. Outside, the city was waking up to discover that its most feared director had finally learned the difference between strength and cruelty, between legacy and truth. Victor Chen walked out of the warehouse where it all began, carrying his confessions toward the sunrise. Behind him, the empty studio held only ghosts and the lingering echo of a projector that had finally shown him who he really was. Some stories, he realized, could only end with the truth.